The pen, they say, is mightier than the sword. But who are they? And what are they talking about? Obviously, if you bring a pen to a sword fight, you're even dumber than the guy who brings a knife to a gunfight. At least a knife is a weapon. So this classic cliche is a figure of speech. It's not meant to be taken literally. But if we can't take it as literally true, obviously, do we still have to accept it as figuratively true? What kind of figure of speech is it, anyway? Well, as figures of speech go, it's not a simile. There's no like or as comparison being made. It's tempting to call it a metaphor, but it's not exactly that either. The pen is like a sword. That would be a simile. The pen is a sword. That would be a metaphor. But in the pen is mightier than the sword and the pen are not being compared in that way. They're being contrasted with each other. So it's a different, more symbolic comparison. The pen is not being compared to a sword. The sword is not being compared to a pen. They're each being compared to something different. In this case, both the sword and the pen are a concrete object symbolizing a more abstract concept. The kind of symbolism we're talking about here makes use of a device called metonymy. Metonymy is a figure of speech where one word or term or phrase is used in place of another with which it is closely associated. For example, we talk about the press when we're meaning reporters, the crown when we're talking about royalty, or Washington or the White House when we're talking about our elected representatives. We also use metonymy in such innocuous phrases as I'm going to go to bed now, meaning I'm going to go to sleep, or at least attempt to sleep. So we see that whereas a metaphor or simile describes or states a relationship between two things, in metonymy, you presuppose that relationship. So what's being presupposed in the pen is mightier than the sword? What do the pen and the sword stand for? At the most basic, the pen stands for writing, obviously, and the sword stands for violence. Some kind of violent act. Weapons of violence, right? Because the pen is the tool of the writer, the sword is the tool of the soldier. But if we dig a little deeper into the symbolism here, the pen itself can stand for the intellect, intelligence itself, whereas the sword can stand for pure brute force, violence as a concept. So, is the pen mightier than the sword? Throughout history, it's been a combination of both that have changed the political landscape of the world, right? Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, they all had great strength of arms, but they also had some brilliant tacticians, made some very smart moves in battle. And don't forget, it was the intellect that invented the cannon, the machine gun, and the nuclear bomb. So does this mean that the most important function of intelligence, the only function that matters in terms of history, is its use in making weapons of war? Well, let's ask this. What remains of all of those once great military empires? What remains of Alexander's conquest, of Genghis Khan's, other than the wall, right? Even of the pharaohs of Egypt and all their military strength. We have some stone structures. We have some buildings, some statues, a wall. What do we really remember? What of those great conquests of the sword really lasts? What part of the military might of those great nations of the past impacts our lives today and changes how we see and think about the world? Spartan, Mongol, even French and British might are nowadays lost to history. We can still learn from them, and there certainly is great value in studying the historical rises and falls of the past and of great military conquests and things like that, but they're hardly living forces in our lives today. We've got our own military issues going on to worry about, which, again, will merely be footnotes to history in the future. But what about classical Greek, Chinese, and Celtic myths? What about the philosophy, poetry, and plays of long-dead civilizations? we're still reading those today. We're still performing those plays. We're still looking at that artwork. It is changing us as we go. Those pieces of the past art, of the intellect of the past, we still have today. Those pieces of the pen, not only do we still have them, they still live on through us. The Iliad and the Odyssey speak to us and through us. Oedipus Rex, the Upanishads, the Bible, the Quran, the plays of Shakespeare, they are all still active and working in our lives today. They are determining the kind of people that many of us become. They shape our thought and they help guide our lives, far more so than just a bomb or a sword or a gun. Those certainly can have an immediate impact. They certainly can have an effect. Violence and the threats of violence certainly have changed the world, but what really changes the world, changes people for the long term, and keeps changing people continuously. The swords of the Caesars built an empire for a time, but that time is over, and someday even today's empires will fall. Most of them are pretty young, many of them less than 100 years old. 100 years from now, they'll be mere memories. But some of the great artwork, the great writings, even the great films of today, we can hope will live on. Learning from past experience will live on and will continue to speak to people and change people into the future. The words, the thoughts, the stories of the past live on and will continue to live on as long as there are men and women to breathe life into them. So, is the pen mightier than the sword? You decide. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this little philosophical exploration. I hope you learned something about the concept of metonymy through it. So go ahead and start using that in your writing. Let me know what you thought down below in the comments. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I don't always get philosophical, but when I do, I kind of nerd out on it because that was my undergrad degree. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, any comments, and I'll talk to you next time. Until then, good luck and good writing. Peace.